please welcome Elizabeth.May.
Thanks, Ariel. And I'm very happy, of course, that I can meet with you and give you a bit of an update on how things have been in the House of Commons. Getting back to Ariel's initial point about the history of getting Greens elected in first past the post systems, Australia was a bit of an anomaly. They had a head start in that their Senate has been elected with proportional representation. So the role of Greens in politics in Australia was better known than in Canada. So Senator Bob Brown in Australia is actually the dean of their parliament. He is the longest serving senator or MP in the House or Senate in the Parliament of Australia. So Adam Bandt, who made the historic breakthrough in Melbourne, joined a caucus, a significant caucus that was able actually to negotiate with both, meet with Tony Abbott and the Liberal Democratic Coalition Party, which is the right-wing party of Australia, met with Julia Gillard, and actually it was the role of kingmaker fell to the Australian Greens, and the reason that there's a carbon tax in Australia now and a program on climate, and unfortunately the Labour leader and PM of Australia, Julia Gillard, appears to be the least popular person in Australia at the moment, but due to the fact that the Greens put her in place as Prime Minister, she was obligated to act on climate. So it's a very interesting situation right now in Australia. But Adam Bandt won in a riding that had been Labour for 60 years. I think it was a huge upset for Adam Bandt to win in Melbourne. A bit of an anomaly that gave him a head start in the UK was that Carolyn Lucas, leader of the Green Party of the UK, had previously been elected over and over again as a member of the European Parliament. So people who voted for Carolyn Lucas had seen her name on the ballot, voted for her, and seen her as part of a parliament before. They chose in the UK to put a lot of the resources on her riding in a way that we didn't in Canada, by the way. We ran a full slate. The only places where we didn't have candidates were where we had disputes with returning officers, and frankly, in at least one of those cases, I think the returning officer should be sued. I think there was a case of racism, but that's another whole issue. We only fell short of candidates in a few ridings, so we had well over 300 candidates everywhere. The British Greens didn't run candidates everywhere, and in fact, their total popular support in the election in which they elected Carolyn Lucas was less than 1%. So I know when we look at the election results of 2011 compared to 2008, as Greens, there's a tendency to feel, well, everybody's very happy, obviously, across the country that we made a historic breakthrough. It would be wrong to read it as a trade-off, where we won in Saanich Gulf Islands because we didn't run in other ridings. We didn't do that. That's not like what happened with the UK Greens and Carolyn Lucas. The Canadian media tried to tell people that, and you may have heard them saying, well, Elizabeth May can't be in the debates because they're only really running in one riding, which was an absolutely outrageous thing for media to say. We're running in, you've got Bloc Québécois in the debates and running in Quebec only, and you've got us running in ridings across the country. So it was a difficult situation for so many ridings, and we went. And this is coming back to the success here in Victoria. In 2008, we had 41 ridings that achieved that all-important 10%. Because with 10%, and that point I made earlier with Michael about the finances, when you get more than 10% of the popular vote in a riding, you're entitled to 60% of your campaign expenses back. This is a very important thing. I was recently doing a fundraiser in Calgary North where they got 9.9%. And there was a vote recount in Bruce Grey Owen Sound because it was, I think it was fewer than 20 votes that they were shy of the 10% mark. So in my view, and we can open this up to questions, maybe there's some other bits of analysis we should bring to it, but in looking at the 2011 election returns, I don't think there's any question that we're better off now with a seat in the House of Commons than if we'd had a vote increase nationally overall as in over 2008. If we'd gotten over 1 million votes or 1.5 million votes but still failed to elect an MP, I think we'd have a harder time in the next election. But as it is, we managed to hang on to 500,000 votes, which I think is phenomenal when you consider being kept out of the debates. I sometimes refer to the media as airbrushing us out of the election campaign. I run into media all the time in Ottawa now. I say, gee, why are you using a cane? You're imitating Jack? I didn't know you were using canes. I've been using a cane. I've been on the wait list for a hip replacement since January. And the reason you don't know this is you guys didn't cover our campaign. If you watched the national campaign where we did in portions by the whistle-stop train trips and in portions other ways, I was on and off the train with my cane all the time. And the extent to which media in Ottawa expressed surprise that I'm waiting for a hip replacement, I said, well, I don't have to make the point very much farther that they really weren't covering our campaign in this election. So I think it's a real tribute to all the Green candidates across the country. We had a much better executed campaign. We had a more coherent message. We had a terrific campaign manager nationally. And yet we went from 41 ridings that got over 10% of the vote to 7. And this is one of the 7. So Jared did a great job, the campaign manager did a great job, people in this room did a great job, because getting over 10% of the vote, and of course there was obviously a green focus in Southern Vancouver Island, but we did, the fact that Jared got over 10% of the vote here in conditions that were designed to tell people not to vote green. First you had the media saying we weren't running anywhere else, then you had the media saying, it's the Orange Crush. You know, it was a fairly difficult time for lots of our candidates who found even their own supporters saying, we better vote NDP, the NDP's on the rise. So it was a very hard-fought campaign nationally. The victories that we achieved, and I think it is a victory here to get over 10% of the vote. And of course, in my riding, I'm so thrilled with Savage Gulf Islands for many reasons, obviously winning, but you probably heard we had 75% voter turnout, which is just fantastic. And of that, we had 46% voting green, and Gary Lund was well back at 35%. So we did some things right. We had a terrific base that was built up by Andrew Lewis and Greens over the years, and it's a community that was ready for change. And I think Carol's right about our prospects for next time in Victoria. We need to look at a couple of things that I want to share about electoral opportunities. I'm not waiting to 2015 to see more Greens elected in the House of Commons. There will inevitably be by-elections, and we want to be ready for those. We want to, there'll be people who got elected with the Liberals, for instance, who think, this isn't quite what I bargained for, this third-party status and down the end of the bench and having to sit with Elizabeth.May, for goodness sake. The Liberals are squashed all around me, Justin Trudeau's right in front of me. Yeah, it's quite fun, yeah. And then next to me are the Bloc. Well, the poor benighted Bloc. There's 4 of them left. And my benchmate is a lovely young man, a really terrific speaker and very diligent, Jean-François Fortin. And I sometimes say, poor Jean-François, he was running to be elected in a party that had a leader, Gilles Duceppe, who was generally respected, even by people who don't like the Bloc's mission. Gilles Duceppe was a respected leader, I think it's fair to say. And they had about 50 MPs. And every prospect in the world of returning to the House of Commons in exactly the same shape they were in. And now they're there with 4, and they don't get additional resources, and Jean-François has to sit with me. So, there again, it's, I think there's, and who knows, there definitely are disaffected, in the closet disaffected conservatives. The asbestos issue is bringing some of them forward. My next article in Island Tides focuses on the asbestos issue, but I really see asbestos as an issue that for the first time holds the promise of breaking up Harper's control over people. Because as a moral issue, there seem to be some MPs who just can't live with themselves if they don't say something. So Mark Warra, who is a Conservative MP from Langley, he has never been someone that I would think would buck control. He spoke out against asbestos. Now he tells me it's completely unrelated to his statements on asbestos that he was removed as Parliamentary Secretary for the Environment. Because I tweeted, good for Mark Warra, and what a shame that he's now lost his position as Parliamentary Secretary because of it. And he took me aside and he said, no, it's really not related. We need to bring new people in and give everyone a chance. So he's being a good sport about the whole thing, but he's still interested in figuring out what, and there are other MPs, a couple in Ontario who've spoken out about asbestos who are Conservatives. So who knows whether they'd ever be so disaffected that they'd quit Parliament. I'm not projecting that. I have no idea which one might. But there are, Lee Richardson ran for Speaker. He's someone I've known for years because he was a progressive Conservative. Because he ran for Speaker and Harper didn't want him to, he's been removed from the Finance Committee by the PMO because the Liberals like to keep whatever strategy they have at its, at my most generous, I'd say the Liberals are being fair-minded and generous in putting Lee Richardson back on the Finance Committee, but there are other interpretations that you could bring to that as well. In any case, there may well be MPs who think, my opportunities lie elsewhere. I don't want to spend the next 4 years in the situation I now find myself in. They could decide to run provincially. They could decide to run municipally. Who knows what might happen between now and 2015. I think the likelihood is extremely high, leaving aside unfortunate things like deaths and whatnot. But really, the chances of by-elections between now and 2015 are rather high. So as the campaign committee of the Greens nationally, we're looking at how do we raise money to be ready for a by-election opportunity when it comes up. That's tough because, as you know, there are two major changes that were made to the 2011 federal budget between when it was tabled in March for the first time and when it was passed in July or in late June. The two major changes were the 2.2 billion for Quebec to embrace the HST. Good luck to them with that, bon chance. We've had our experience. The next thing that they did was, of course, to change the campaign finance rules and to scale down. So with our lower voter return, we were going to see less resources available. And it was mentioned earlier, the split resources with EDAs, a revenue sharing agreement premised on the idea we get this annual amount based on our votes. That annual amount's going down. It'll go down in lockstep for all of the EDAs as well. And that annual amount this year, this year's budget left it the same. Next year's budget will be $1.50 a vote. The budget after that will be $1 a vote. The budget after that will be 50 cents a vote, completely phased out by 2015. So that's a challenge for us as Greens. It means that I'm going to ask all of you personally to become fundraisers for the Green Party. And you don't have to go after people that have, deep pockets and large bank accounts. If you know people who voted Green or even who didn't vote Green but like what we do, suggest to them they go on our website and give us $2 a month. They won't miss it. It's just a credit card transaction. But losing that $2 a year vote means I'm asking people to make up for that. Maybe they'll find that once they're there, they don't mind the idea of $5 a month. Maybe they'll give us $10 a month. But monthly giving, starting at a toonie, would make a big difference because it's predictable and it lets us know what we can do as a party. And we're trying to find out ways, and actually the reason I have to leave early today is now I'm no longer visiting. You wouldn't believe this. I have a supporter who actually canvassed for me who turned 90 today. So her family said, can you send a certificate or something? And I said, oh, I think I'll come and surprise her. So that's why I was a little late. But for all of the people who helped and supported, some of them are going to be willing to give us donations, big and small, to make that difference so that we're ready for the next election. And the other reason I'm leaving, I mentioned, was that there's a federal council call at 4 that I have to get to. And one of the things we're looking at is, in our fundraising plans going forward, how do we replace the revenue splitting with the EDAs with an ongoing financial splitting arrangement, which will no longer be based on what we get predictably from Elections Canada, but joint fundraising, shared fundraising. Let's do a mailing and say, okay, if we are writing to people in Victoria EDA, whatever returns we get after the costs, maybe we split that 50-50. I mean, we need to find some new formula. So I'm not giving much of an address as much as a bringing you up to date, because you're all Green Party members, on the state of play within the party. The campaign committee is working up the plan, how do we elect more MPs? And in by-elections. The model that worked in Sandwich Gulf Islands is particularly well suited to a by-election, because the ingredients were clear. Have a high-profile candidate, start work early, put some investment in, which I never had in previous election campaigns. I've never had help to have an office open, to train volunteers. We had 1,000 trained volunteers before the writ dropped, and then that grew to 2,500 volunteers during the campaign. So it was a quite extraordinary effort on the ground. Those are all things that we could do in a by-election more easily than we can do in a general election, if it's a place where we have a hope of winning. But when I look at Adam Bantt's riding, 60 years labor, not one that people would have picked as really having a great chance. So we should look carefully and look past the conventional wisdom to figure out where we can elect more Greens. Another thing I'll throw out to you, because I love feedback, how do Greens feel about the idea of someone who got elected in a different party deciding between now and 2015 they want to sit with me as a Green Party member? I don't have anybody at the moment thinking about it that I know of, but I can see where it might happen. And then what's the response from the Green Party? We have no policy on that now. Do we say we think it's wrong to cross the floor so we won't take you? Do we say we have some threshold tests we'd like to apply? For those of you who are thinking we did that before, Blair Wilson joined the Greens when he was sitting as an independent. So when you have someone who's sitting as a conservative or sitting as a liberal or sitting as an NDPer, suppose they should decide, because frankly, I wouldn't want to be in any of those parties. And not because of their policies alone, because of the way their MPs are treated. So, I mean, in the House of Commons, as I sit at my bench, and before any, obviously, obviously, you probably know I'm very diligent. I read everything. So, obviously, if we're going to vote on a bill, I've read the damn bill. Guess what? I think I'm the only one there who's actually read the bill, because they don't need to. As a matter of fact, it's an advantage not to, because when they sit down at their desk, the pages deliver a note to each and every MP. So the Conservative MPs receive a note prepared by their House leader. Or no, it's actually prepared by the whip. The whip delivers a note to every MP in that party. And I went around because I saw what the Liberals were getting, and I saw what the Bloc was getting, because we all sit together. So I decided to wander over after everybody had left and look at what the pages lying around on the floor at the NDP desks and the Conservative desks, just to verify that they were getting exactly the same messages, which say, today we're voting on Bill Blunt, vote no. Then we're voting on Bill Blunt, vote yes. Then we're voting on Bill Blunt, vote no. And the reason I think that, the reason sort of anecdotal evidence that other people aren't reading the bill is when I gave two what would be called major speeches in the House during the filibuster, and lots of interventions as well. If any of you were foolish enough to stay up through the night 2 nights in a row, I had some really good moments at around 3 in the morning. But I gave a speech on the hoist motion that was 10 minutes, and I gave a speech on the bill itself, which was 10 minutes. And when I was, both times, I would reference the sections of the back to work legislation that needed to be changed, because I was trying to suggest a compromise was possible. Why not fix this bill, get the mail moving, not stick it to Cup W? It was a horrible bill. I mean, I used to practice labor law, and this was a horrible bill. And so I was all for fighting it, but I kept hoping the NDP, having caused the filibuster, would explain to opposition party members if they had a strategy. Well, I concluded at the end they had no strategy, but I kept trying to say, well, look, we can't expect Canada Post to be negotiating now with Cup W, because they have in their back pocket the back to work legislation, which will inevitably be passed because Harper has all the votes, or enough votes to pass anything, and the votes in the Senate. So the only reason to buy time, surely to goodness we can't be buying time, hoping that Canada Post will negotiate for itself a worse deal than management has with the back to work legislation. That didn't make any sense to me. And what made sense was maybe Lisa Raitt, as Labor Minister, might agree to some changes to the bill that she could then try to convince Harper to accept, with the idea, might be hard to do, but maybe there'd be a chance to say, from the Conservative point of view, this shows we're prepared to work well, play nice, we have a majority, but we're not going to abuse our strength. This was a good deal for the workers, a good deal for Canada Post, and got everybody back to work. I mean, they could have done that. I could see it as possible. But none of that was happening. So anyway, when I got up to speak to the bill, when I'd speak to the sections that needed changing, I had members from a number of parties, virtually all the parties at one time or another, say to me, I really agreed with most of your speech, and it was really impressive the way you quoted those sections of the bill. How did you know? I read it. So I've had things like, I got up to give it was funny, Denise Savoy is deputy speaker, as you know. She didn't get elected as speaker, which is a shame. But as deputy speaker, she was, I think it was around, I don't know, it was sometime after a long period of sleep deprivation. And by the way, the other parties, as you probably know in the filibuster, they rotated through. So everybody was going for naps. Like they'd go for 6-hour shifts. 6 hours in the House, go 6 hours, sleep someplace, come back for 6 hours. I was the only one who didn't take, I didn't have, obviously there was no one with whom I could trade on and off. I wasn't going to ask the block guys to watch out for me and call me if anything happened, really, you know. I could have. They're very nice. They might have done that for me, but I wasn't going to ask them. So I went on for a 61-hour period. I had 3 hours sleep between 3 and 6 a.m. on Saturday. So I think it was right after I got back early Saturday morning that things had gotten much worse. I mean, the decorum was falling apart. The Conservatives, the parliamentary secretary of the Prime Minister, a guy named Dean Del Mastro, was bellowing at a newly elected NDP member named Ryan Cleary, whom I quite like. He's from Humber St. Barb's, I think is the name of his riding. Anyway, decorum was falling apart. Everyone was yelling at everybody else. And MPs use points. You can stand on a point of order anytime you want. It is as of right, any member of Parliament can stand and say, point of order, Madam or Mr. Speaker, and they should be recognized. So Denise was dealing with about 5 people, all jumping up near the front end. I'm, as you probably know, far rear corner. Maybe if you've read my blog, you know that there's 308 members of Parliament. I'm in seat 309. I think it's very amusing. 309. I said to someone, it's like Harry Potter, it's like platform 9 3/4. I'm somewhere else in another zone. Anyway, I'm way far away from the speaker. And she had these people popping up, and they were all saying, point of order. And she said, what's your point of order? What he just said wasn't true. And that's not a point of order. It's not a proper point of order at all. So she was just dismissing them. And another one would pop up and say, is that the same point of order? Well, yes, but I had to add on that point of order. Well, that's not a proper point of order. She said, we're moving on to questions and comments. And I had to, it's the first time I'd stood on point of order because I've read all the rules and regulations. I know what a proper point of order is. And I was never going to ask a question or stand for a point of order that wasn't a proper point of order. So it's the point that she was dismissing the whole raft of us and moving on to the next phase. I said, Madam Speaker, I have a real point of order. I mean, because she was actually, she looked at her and said, oh, the Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands. And then I stood holding the standing orders and said, according to Standing Order 18, and I read it aloud, members are not allowed to interrupt another Honourable Member who is speaking. And Standing Order 20 says, Honourable Members are not allowed to make derogatory comments, and I read the proper language, quote unquote. I said that the House started out so well, I'd urge, Madam Speaker, could you urge all Honourable Members to be mindful that these are the rules? Well, she ruled and said, quite right. She thanked me later. And then I had MPs from different parties come to me and say, boy, that was impressive. I never knew those were rules. Now, these are people who've served, these are people recently re-elected. So I'm not trying to make fun of them, and they're good. Honestly, I like most of the MPs I'm working with. Right around all sides of the House of Commons, these are fine people. Nothing, as I said, and it was Barbara Yaffe wrote a column about this in the Vancouver Sun that appeared a day or so ago, where I said there's really nothing wrong with these people. It's the system. So if you're in a system where you're told how to vote, what to say, and how to think, which is really what they're told, your life is a lot easier if you go along with that flow. And if you happen to be the kind of person, and my role, I thought, I had to rethink my role as the only Green MP from where I thought I would be in a minority parliament with real opportunity for clout to a majority parliament. I think, okay, now this is entirely different kettle of fish. I wouldn't have wished this outcome on my worst enemy, but it's now my outcome and I've got to figure it out. I thought, okay, the place where I'm going to be able to make the biggest difference is one, to continue to fight for better decorum, and two, to know all the rules, practices, and procedures better than anybody else. And so if the rules are being violated, to be able to call people on the rules. And to use process and procedure as effectively as possible, which is what I've been doing so far, which is why I've had, well, I mean, the vote on Libya was obvious. How could a Green vote to continue bombing Tripoli? The good question would be, how could so many peace activists who got elected as NDP members of Parliament continue to vote to bomb Tripoli? But the piece of paper on their desk said, we're voting yes to 3 more months of the Libya mission. And it didn't matter what their background was or what they personally felt about it. Jack Layton made it clear they had to vote the way he wanted to vote. So being on my own on that vote was a surprise to me, particularly because the Bloc didn't vote with me. I thought at least the 4 Bloc votes would go against bombing Libya. But the additional level of media coverage, impact, and effort to make the House work that I've had has been by knowing the rules. Some of you will know a Victoria boy who has a family home on Saturna, so he straddles both of our ridings. I don't know how many of you know Ben Rankin, whose father's Murray Rankin, who's a lawyer in town. But Ben has been working with me. I've been very lucky that he was planning to work in Ottawa for the summer, and his summer position with the Privy Council office fell through, and he's currently at Harvard. And so he started working with me in early May, and he'll be with me till late August. And between the two of us, we've really we dove in to regulations, practice, and procedure to make it work, to try to make the house work better. So that's, it gives you just, I think that's just kind of a skimming across the top of how the party is these days, which I think is in very good shape. Remind people there is going to be, you will receive a ballot. It'll come to you on email, if you're on email. If you have no email and you've given us a mailing address, you'll get an envelope. It is really important to vote. It includes a vote on a leadership review, so please don't just assume that everybody's going to vote, yes, we like Elizabeth as leader, or if you decide you don't, please remember to vote too. But I'd be very grateful because I think there's a risk of very low participation in our internal elections. Personally, I think it matters to elect John Stryker as chair of Federal Council. I'm endorsing him, I'm allowed to. He's the MP. That's Freudian slip. He's the future MP for the Greens from the Yukon. He's done tremendously well there. If any of you have attended either the VGM in Toronto or the VGM in Pictou, he co-chaired those procedures. If you watched them online, you would have seen John. The reason I'm endorsing him, because Mark McKenzie is also a friend of mine from Ontario and is terrific, but John's running to stay as we now have an elected executive. We've not had that before. The structure of council has changed, so you're actually electing an executive, voting for the position of treasurer, voting for English vice president, French vice president, maybe vice chair, I'm not positive, and chair of council. And John Stryker has done a superb job because it's very hard to convene a group of approximately 30 people from across the country once a month on conference calls and be able to get useful work done, find consensus. I mean, that's the real goal of Greens, is that you don't put issues to a vote, that every meeting emerges with consensus. So please, when that reminder to vote for council and leadership review reaches your email, don't hit delete. Please go online and cast your votes. Anyway, thanks for your time, and if there's still time, you've got a lot to get through in your agenda. I'm happy to answer questions, but I'll leave that to you if there's still time. Thank you.